The night sky was swallowed by thunder, and rain hammered the earth like a warning. Lightning split the horizon, casting fleeting shadows across the rugged land. But it wasn't the storm that shook the old rancher when 6 figures appeared at his gate. They were soaked to the bone, desperate and wild-eyed, their clothes torn and faces streaked with mud. Among them, one woman limped, barefoot and swollen with child, her breath ragged but fierce. No one could have imagined the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest that had driven these 6 souls to knock on a stranger's door. He was a man carved by solitude and hardship, the kind whose silence spoke louder than any word. His ranch was a fortress built against the unforgiving West, a place where trust was earned with sweat and gunpowder, not given freely. Yet, when those women's eyes met his through the rain, something stirred, a flicker of recognition that the land had chosen him for a purpose far greater than he had ever dreamed. In that moment, the storm wasn't just raging outside. It was raging within him too, testing the limits of his heart and his courage. The women said little at first, their voices broken by the wind and pain. They carried stories heavier than the storm itself, stories of loss, betrayal, and escape from a world that refused to spare mercy for women alone. The barefoot pregnant woman, who should have been the weakest, stood with a strength that demanded respect, her eyes daring the rancher to turn them away. What they brought with them was more than trouble. It was a chance at redemption, a reckoning, and a choice that would redefine everything he thought he knew about survival and sacrifice. As the rain poured harder, washing away the dust of forgotten roads and forgotten lives, the rancher faced a decision that would carve his name into the very soil beneath his feet. To open his gate was to invite uncertainty, danger, and perhaps even heartbreak. To shut it would be to turn his back on the storm, and on the 6 women who had nowhere else to go. In the unforgiving wilderness of the West, choices like these were rarely easy, but they were what made a man more than just a survivor. This is not a story about shelter from the storm. It is a story about the storms we carry within, the battles of the heart and soul that no rain can wash away. About how, sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is to open his door wide and say, "Come in." And what happens when 6 broken lives collide with one man's courage in the wild and lonely expanse of the Old West. The first knock was hesitant, barely louder than the rain tapping on the wooden gate, but it was enough to stir Jacob Thompson from his restless sleep. He had lived on this ranch for more than 30 years, a man hardened by loss and solitude, a man who believed the land was the only thing he could trust. But when he opened the door and saw 6 women, drenched and trembling, huddled together under the storm's rage, something inside him shifted, especially when his eyes met the barefoot, pregnant woman clutching her swollen belly with a fierce determination that refused pity. Jacob didn't speak at first. He simply stepped aside, letting them in one by one, each soaked figure pressing into the warmth of his small cabin. They smelled of earth and fear and desperation, but they carried with them a quiet strength, born from too many nights spent running. As the fire sputtered to life, the women huddled close, sharing broken stories and whispers, stories of escape from men who saw them as less than human, from towns that turned blind eyes, from lives stolen piece by piece. And though Jacob had spent years shutting the world out, he listened. He had to. The pregnant woman, Mary, was the heart of the group, a beacon despite her exhaustion. Her eyes held stories that went unspoken, but Jacob could see the resolve etched deep in her face. He watched her as she carefully tended to a young girl's fever, and he realized that these women weren't just seeking shelter. They were seeking safety, belonging, and maybe even hope. The storm outside was fierce, but the storm within that cabin was fiercer still. It was a battle between past wounds and the fragile possibility of healing. Jacob knew the risks. Opening his home to 6 strangers could mean trouble, jeopardizing the fragile peace he'd built on the ranch. Townsfolk would gossip. Danger could follow them here. But he also knew the cost of turning them away. Years ago, he'd lost his own family to the cruelties of the world. He couldn't stand by and let it happen again, not to these women. The rain drummed on the roof like a heartbeat, and with each beat, Jacob's resolve hardened. He made a silent vow. No matter the cost, they would be safe here. That night, as the wind howled and the fire crackled, 6 women and a lone rancher sat beneath the same roof, 2 worlds colliding in the vast, unforgiving West. Each carried scars invisible to the eye, yet raw and bleeding beneath their skin. And though silence filled many moments, it was a silence heavy with unspoken promises. Jacob didn't know what lay ahead, but he understood one thing clearly. His life had changed the moment those 6 knocks echoed through the storm, and there was no turning back. Morning light filtered weakly through rain-streaked windows, casting a soft glow over the cabin's worn wooden floor. Jacob stirred awake to the sound of soft murmurs. The women had begun to move about quietly, tending to small chores, comforting the children, and finding their places in a world that still felt foreign but, for now, safe. Mary, despite her condition, carried herself with a dignity that seemed to hold the fragile thread of hope for all of them. Jacob watched as she prepared a modest meal, each movement deliberate and steady despite her pain. The women began sharing their stories slowly, never all at once, but in fragments of sorrow and courage. Each tale was a testament to survival against impossible odds. There was Sarah, who had escaped a mining camp where women were kept like prisoners, Anna, who fled a town where her family was torn apart by greed, and Ruth, whose children had been taken, leaving her to walk alone. These stories filled the cabin with a weight that made the air thick, yet they also wove a tapestry of resilience, one Jacob hadn't expected but felt privileged to witness. Jacob, a man of few words, found himself opening up too. He spoke of the years spent in silence after losing his wife and son to a fever that no medicine could tame. He told them how the ranch had been both his refuge and his prison. In this exchange of pain and survival, walls began to fall, between the rancher and the women, between past and present. Trust was not freely given, but it grew, fragile as new grass after a long drought. But the outside world was never far away. News spread quickly in these parts. Neighbors whispered about the 6 women sheltered by Jacob Thompson, the man no one dared to trouble. Some offered aid, secretly sending food or medicine. Others watched with suspicion, warning that trouble might follow, that mercy could bring ruin. Jacob heard the rumors, but paid them no mind. His home was their sanctuary now, and sanctuary was worth any price. As days turned into weeks, the storm passed, but the weight of what had brought these women to his gate remained. Jacob and the women worked together to build a life on the edge of the wilderness, one piece at a time. The ranch became more than a place of isolation. It became a beacon of hope, a testament to the strength found in unlikely alliances forged by desperation and courage. And though the road ahead was uncertain, none of them would walk it alone. As the weeks stretched on, the women began to settle into a fragile rhythm, one stitched together by small victories and quiet moments of relief. Mary's condition worsened, her steps slower, but her spirit remained unbroken. Jacob became her steadfast protector, sitting by her side through long nights, whispering stories of the land and the sky, hoping to soothe both her and the unborn child she carried. The others, Sarah, Anna, Ruth, and the remaining 2, found strength in each other, sharing tasks and stories, laughter and tears, weaving together a fragile family born of shared suffering. Jacob noticed a change in himself, too. The weight of solitude that had once pressed him to the earth began to lift. Each smile from the women, each hopeful glance exchanged, breathed life into his weary heart. He found himself repairing fences with more care, tending the animals with renewed purpose, and opening his eyes to the beauty that still existed in the harsh wilderness. The storm that had driven the women to his door was nothing compared to the storm of transformation within his own soul. One evening, as a pale moon rose over the hills, Mary collapsed. The pain was sudden and fierce. Jacob and the women rushed to her side, their hands trembling but determined. The land outside held its breath while inside, hope and fear battled in silence. With every minute that passed, Jacob's resolve hardened. This child was more than a life. It was a symbol of survival, a beacon of future in a world that often threatened to snuff out both. When the first cry finally pierced the night, it was a sound that seemed to shake the very mountains, a new beginning born from the darkest hour. The birth marked a turning point, not just for Mary, but for all of them. The child, a girl with eyes as bright as the morning sun, was named Grace. She was a living testament to the endurance of the human spirit and the power of compassion. In Grace's first breath, the women found renewed strength, and Jacob found a purpose beyond the land he had tended for decades. Together, they pledged to protect this fragile gift, no matter what storms lay ahead. But peace was never guaranteed in the West. Word of the women and the newborn spread to nearby settlements, stirring whispers of scandal and danger. Some saw them as outlaws, others as threats to the fragile order of the frontier. Jacob knew that their sanctuary was fragile, a sanctuary built on trust that the world might yet try to break. But as he stood holding Grace in his arms, surrounded by the women who had become his family, he understood something deep and unshakable. Sometimes, the fiercest storms come not from the sky, but from the hearts of men, and it is in facing those storms that true courage is born. The first signs of trouble came not with a gunshot, but with a visitor. A man from a neighboring town, sharp-eyed and cold-hearted, arrived on Jacob's doorstep with a list of accusations and demands. He claimed the women were fugitives, criminals fleeing justice, and that Jacob was harboring lawbreakers. His words were sharp and laced with threats, but Jacob met him with steady eyes and quiet resolve. "They came to me for shelter," he said simply, "and they'll leave with my protection." The visitor scoffed, warning of consequences that could ruin them all. That night, as the wind howled outside and the women huddled close, Jacob sat beside them, the weight of the coming storm heavy in the air. He knew this fight would not be won with rifles alone, but with unyielding conviction. The women, each bearing their own scars, prepared themselves not just to defend their lives, but to reclaim their dignity in a world that had tried to steal it from them. It was a battle for more than survival. It was a battle for justice, for family, for hope. Days later, riders came, men sent to enforce a law that knew nothing of mercy. They approached with guns drawn and voices raised, but Jacob stood firm, refusing to surrender the women to a fate worse than death. The women did not cower. Mary, despite her recent childbirth, stood tall and spoke with a quiet authority that silenced even the roughest of men. Her voice was a testament to strength born from pain, a warning that they would not be broken again. The confrontation was tense, fragile as the dawn before a storm. Words gave way to threats to standoffs. But then, unexpectedly, a voice rose from the back of the crowd. A young deputy who had witnessed the kindness Jacob had shown, the strength the women carried, and the peace they had forged together. He urged for mercy, for understanding, reminding the men that sometimes the law must bow to the courage of the human heart. Slowly, the tide turned. Though the threat lingered, the men eventually withdrew, leaving Jacob and the women to rebuild what had nearly been lost. Their sanctuary, born from desperation and compassion, had survived. But they all knew this was just one battle in a longer war. A war not fought with bullets alone, but with every choice to stand, to protect, and to love in the face of a world that so often chooses to turn away. The days following the confrontation were a delicate dance between hope and caution. The women and Jacob worked tirelessly to repair the fences and rebuild the barn, every nail driven a testament to their resilience. Mary, though still fragile from childbirth, moved with a newfound strength that inspired them all. The baby, Grace, became the heart of the homestead, a symbol of life's persistence even amid hardship. Each smile she gifted was like a beam of sunlight breaking through a long storm, reminding everyone why they fought so hard to protect this fragile peace. Jacob found himself waking earlier, not just to tend the land, but to watch over his unexpected family. He shared stories of the past, not as tales of sorrow, but as lessons of survival and endurance. In the quiet moments, he saw the women not as strangers or burdens, but as pillars holding up something greater than himself. The laughter that began to fill the cabin after so long was soft and cautious at first, but it grew bolder with each passing day. It was the sound of healing, the melody of a family forged by fate and fierce love. The nearby townsfolk, once skeptical and harsh, slowly began to soften. Some brought food without fanfare, others offered work and protection. It was a silent truce born not of agreement, but of respect. Jacob's steadfastness, and the women's undeniable courage began to change the narrative. They were no longer just survivors or outcasts. They were a community, a force carved out of compassion and unbreakable will. The land itself seemed to embrace them, yielding richer soil and calmer skies. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rugged cliffs, Jacob stood at the edge of the porch, watching the women and children play in the fading light. Mary cradled Grace close, singing a lullaby in a tongue that carried the history of her people. Sarah and Anna worked side by side, repairing a broken wheelbarrow. Ruth told stories to the younger girls, her voice weaving magic into the twilight. Jacob's heart swelled with a quiet pride, the kind born not from conquest but from protection. This was his legacy, the home he never expected, built not with walls alone but with love. But even as peace settled like a blanket over the ranch, Jacob knew the world beyond the valley was restless. Shadows lingered on the horizon, men who would see their sanctuary torn apart. He understood that the true test was yet to come, and that courage was not a single act but a lifetime's journey. Yet, surrounded by the women who had found strength in each other, and in him, Jacob felt ready to face whatever storms might come, with arms wide open and a heart unyielding. The following months tested their resolve in ways no one could have foreseen. A harsh drought swept through the valley, drying the creeks and wilting crops. The ranch's livestock grew thin, and the threat of hunger loomed large. But the women, led by Mary's fierce determination, found ways to adapt. They rationed food carefully, collected every drop of water, and shared what little they had without hesitation. Their spirit, once battered, now burned brighter, an unspoken promise that they would endure no matter the cost. Jacob worked from dawn to dusk, repairing wells, digging new trenches, and bartering with neighbors for supplies. His hands, rough and calloused, moved with a purpose that surprised even him. He was no longer just a man tending his land. He was a guardian of hope, a keeper of promises made in the darkest nights. And each day, as he returned home weary but unbroken, he found the women waiting, ready to face another day, together. In this time of scarcity, the bond between them deepened. The house, once a refuge, became a sanctuary where stories were shared by firelight and dreams whispered between the rainless nights. Laughter returned in small bursts, an unexpected blessing that reminded them of what they fought to preserve. They celebrated every green sprout, every warm meal, every sunrise as if it were a victory. Because in the West, survival was not just a matter of life and death. It was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. One afternoon, a rider arrived with news that the town council had passed a resolution condemning any who sheltered runaways or fugitives. The threat was real and immediate. Jacob gathered the women and laid bare the risks. They could lose everything, their home, their safety, even their lives. But Mary, holding Grace close, looked each of them in the eye and said, "We have already lost too much to turn back now. This house is our home, and home is worth fighting for." Her words settled over them like a shield, binding them with renewed determination. As dusk fell, Jacob stood once more at his gate, gazing out at the land he had vowed to protect. The storm outside had passed, but the one ahead was gathering strength. Yet, within him burned an unshakable truth. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand tall despite it. And so, surrounded by 6 women, barefoot, battered, but unbowed, he prepared to face whatever the West would throw at them next. Together, they were no longer just survivors. They were a force that no storm could break. The tension that had been quietly simmering finally erupted one cold morning when a group of mounted men appeared on the horizon. They rode hard, dust trailing behind them like a warning sign carried by the wind. Word had spread that Jacob was harboring fugitives, and now the law, or what passed for it, had come to collect. The women gathered their strength, steadying their nerves as the riders approached the gate. Mary, despite her recent hardships, stood at the forefront, her gaze unwavering and fierce. She carried not just the weight of her pregnancy, but the weight of their shared fight for survival. Jacob met the riders calmly, his weathered face unreadable. The sheriff dismounted, his eyes cold but calculating. "You've been warned," he said. "These women don't belong here. You're breaking the law." Jacob's voice was low, steady. "They belong where they find safety." The sheriff laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the valley. "Safety isn't yours to give. You'll turn them over, or face the consequences." But Jacob stood firm, his hand resting on the butt of his rifle, not in threat, but in promise. The women didn't flinch. Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "We've suffered enough. This land is the first place we've known kindness. We won't go back." The standoff stretched, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Tensions mounted as riders shifted uneasily. Then, unexpectedly, one of the deputies, young and uncertain, spoke up. He reminded the men of the mercy Jacob had shown, of the strength the women carried, and the peace they had built. Slowly, voices of reason began to temper the harshness of law. The riders hesitated, caught between duty and conscience. In the end, the men retreated, warning that their return was inevitable. But in that moment, Jacob and the women had won more than a battle. They had won a reprieve, a fragile moment of peace. It was clear, however, that their sanctuary was not yet secure. The West was a land of endless trials, and their fight was far from over. Yet, as the riders vanished beyond the hills, the bond between the 6 women and their protector grew stronger, a testament to resilience forged in the face of relentless storms. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, Jacob stood with Mary by the fire. The baby kicked gently in her womb, a quiet reminder of life's persistence. Jacob placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "We'll face whatever comes, together." Mary smiled, a mixture of exhaustion and fierce hope. In that moment, the storm inside them calmed, not because danger had passed, but because they had found in each other a strength greater than fear. Days turned into weeks, and the harshness of the land tested them in new ways. The ranch's well ran dry, forcing them to trek farther for water. The children grew restless and weary, their laughter tempered by the weight of uncertainty. Yet, through it all, the women and Jacob found moments of grace, sunsets that painted the sky in colors too vivid to ignore, quiet mornings where the world felt still enough to breathe deeply. Their sanctuary was fragile, but it was theirs. Mary's health fluctuated, the pregnancy bringing challenges that required care and vigilance. The women rallied around her, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations, herbs, poultices, and steady hands that soothed pain without question. Jacob, ever the protector, found himself in new roles: healer, counselor, and unwavering pillar. The loneliness he had once known was replaced by a fierce commitment to these women who had become his family. Word of their resilience began to spread, reaching ears in distant towns and trading posts. Some came with offers of aid, a sack of flour, medicine, a kind word. Others came with suspicion, whispers carried like smoke on the wind. Yet none dared challenge the house at Jacob's gate, where courage and kindness had woven a bond stronger than any chain. And inside that bond was the beating heart of a community reborn from pain. One evening, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered secrets through the trees, Jacob sat with each woman, listening to their hopes and fears. They spoke of futures once thought impossible, homes of their own, children raised free from fear, lives rebuilt on the foundations of trust. The house, once a refuge from the storm, had become a beacon of hope. And in the flicker of that firelight, Jacob understood that the true strength of the West was not in its gunfighters or gold, but in those who chose to protect the vulnerable when no one else would. As the night deepened and shadows grew long, Jacob looked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to break. The road ahead was uncertain, but his heart was steady, because when 6 women knocked at his gate during a storm, and he chose to open it, he began a journey that would change not only their lives but the very spirit of the land itself. Together, they faced the wild unknown, bound by courage, resilience, and a love that no storm could ever wash away. As spring unfurled across the valley, life at the ranch took on a rhythm both fragile and fierce. The women worked side by side with Jacob, tending the fields and caring for the animals, their hands roughened by labor, yet tender in their purpose. Grace, the child born amidst the storm, grew strong beneath Mary's watchful eyes, her laughter weaving a new melody into the fabric of their lives. The ranch, once a place of solitude and survival, now pulsed with the heartbeat of family, scarred but unbroken. But peace remained precarious. One afternoon, a rider from town arrived, bearing news that threatened to undo all they had built. The local magistrate had issued orders for the women to be taken into custody, claiming their presence endangered the order of the county. Fear rippled through the ranch, yet Jacob stood unyielding, rallying the women with words steeped in quiet strength. "They can take our papers, but not our spirit. This land, this home, belongs to us now." His resolve became a shield, a beacon for those who had known only shadows. The women prepared to defend their sanctuary, not with violence, but with unwavering solidarity. Sarah, Anna, and Ruth took turns keeping watch as Mary and the others cared for the children. The community that had quietly formed around the ranch sent word of support, neighbors offering aid and vigilance. The storm they faced now was not of rain or thunder, but of law and prejudice, a test of their resilience beyond anything the wilderness had demanded. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rugged cliffs, the riders arrived, not as enemies, but as men weary from their own battles. They came with orders, yes, but also with hesitation. Witnessing the unity and humanity of those at the ranch, some questioned the justice of their mission. Jacob met their uncertainty with respect, opening a door for dialogue that many in the West had long forgotten. It was a fragile peace, brokered not by force, but by the courage to stand firm in truth. The night that followed was filled with quiet prayers and cautious hope. The women and Jacob knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but together, they had kindled a fire that could not be easily extinguished. In the warmth of that fire, beneath a sky dense with stars, they found solace, not in promises of safety, but in the unbreakable bond forged through shared struggle and unyielding love. The storm outside had passed, but the legacy they were building would endure through every season to come. Time wore on, and the legacy of the 6 women and their steadfast protector grew beyond the boundaries of the ranch. Stories of their courage traveled across the rugged West, whispered in saloons and around campfires, stories not of violence, but of compassion, not of surrender, but of resilience. Their home became a sanctuary for the weary, a place where the broken could find healing and the lost could discover belonging. It was a testament to the power of humanity in a land often defined by hardship. Jacob, once a man shaped by solitude and loss, found himself surrounded by life, by laughter, by love, and by the quiet dignity of those he had saved. Mary, radiant with the strength of motherhood, stood as a pillar of hope, her voice now carrying wisdom to those who came seeking refuge. Together, they nurtured a community that thrived not in spite of the world's cruelty, but because they refused to be defined by it. 100 years later, travelers visiting the valley find a house nestled beneath towering pines, its walls weathered but strong, its porch a gathering place for stories passed down through generations. They hear whispers of night when 6 women knocked on a lonely gate during a storm, and how that simple act of mercy changed a man, a family, and a land. The house stands not just as a building, but as a symbol of courage, compassion, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And so, the tale of Jacob and the 6 women remains alive, a beacon shining through the mists of history. It challenges us to consider our own storms, those moments when we face the choice to turn away or to open our doors and hearts to those in need. Because true bravery is found not in the absence of fear, but in the willingness to stand for others, even when the cost is great. This story is a call to all of us, to be the light in the darkness, the shelter in the storm, and the hands that build where others would destroy. For in choosing compassion over cruelty, we shape not only the world around us, but the legacy we leave behind. The story of Jacob Thompson and the 6 women who sought refuge at his gate during a fierce storm is a powerful reminder that true courage often lives in the quietest acts of compassion. Jacob, a man shaped by solitude and hardship, made a choice that many would have feared, to open his door to the desperate, to protect those society had cast aside, and to build a sanctuary where hope could flourish. His story is not just about survival in the unforgiving West, but about the profound impact one person's kindness can have on the lives of many. Throughout their journey, these women showed us the strength that rises from shared struggle, and how even in the harshest environments, resilience can bloom. They were barefoot, battered, and burdened, yet within them burned an unyielding fire that refused to be extinguished. Together with Jacob, they transformed a simple ranch into a home, a place of healing, courage, and unwavering solidarity. Their legacy teaches us that compassion is not a weakness, but the most powerful force capable of changing the course of countless lives. As you reflect on their story, consider the storms in your own life, the moments when fear and doubt threaten to close every door. The lesson here is clear. It is in choosing to open those doors, to extend a hand when the world turns away, that we find our true strength. Compassion is a choice, and one act of bravery, no matter how small, can spark a ripple effect that shapes communities, restores faith, and builds legacies far beyond what any gunfire ever could. This tale from the Old West calls each of us to look inward and ask, when faced with the choice to turn away or to stand for others, what will I choose? Because the courage to protect, to nurture, and to love, even in the face of overwhelming odds, is what defines us. It is what gives meaning to our lives and shapes the world we leave behind. And sometimes, it takes just one door open to change everything. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep within, stay connected with us. Subscribe to the channel for more compelling tales of bravery and humanity from the Old West and beyond. Like the video if you believe that kindness is the greatest strength of all, and share your thoughts in the comments below. How would you have answered the knock at your gate during a storm? Your voice matters. Let it be heard.